This episode was a huge step in the right direction for me. There were so many times that genuinely got me excited in a way that I hoped I would be for every episode leading up to this. I'm not going to do a full breakdown this time, but rather go into the positives in the first half and then the negatives in the last. Spoilers from here on out. So the flashbacks. The flashbacks to this pre-Attack of the Clones era were such a welcome surprise and something I didn't expect to see so late in the show's run. Hayden Christensen doesn't miss a beat. I thought he and Ewan stepped back into the role so beautifully. And while I can appreciate a good nostalgia trip, they utilized the flashbacks in service of the story, exactly how I hoped they would. That being Anakin and Obi-Wan in a training session set in the bright and colorful era where they're still friends, mirroring the events of this gray and somber era where they're mortal enemies. I love how this is gluing the Republic era and the Imperial era together, while at the same time cutting to the emotional core of their conflict. Kenobi is very well intentioned in his teachings and is trying to humble Anakin, beating him with swiftness and his wits rather than brute force. I appreciated the subtle performance by Hayden because when Kenobi smiles at the end of the training session, Anakin shows a face of understanding, but he never quite smiles back. Rather than feeling humbled, he just feels humiliated. He's so wrapped up in his ego, like, I must be the strongest, I must be the fastest, I must be the cleverest. Harboring these beliefs turns what should be a learning experience into nothing but shame, and creates this fertile ground for negative emotions to fester. This is good stuff. So Vader makes Reva into the Grand Inquisitor, and launches the attack on Jabim. As the Empire approaches, Kenobi steps into the role of leader or general, and lays out his game plan for all the survivors. They don't need to defeat the Empire, they just need to hold them off long enough to leave. A flood of troopers positions themselves in front of the blast doors, which is cool for how overwhelming their numbers are, but this detail also feeds into a negative I'll address later. I like what Tala says to Kenobi this episode. After explaining the guilt she feels over helping the Empire hunt innocent people, she says, "You were right, some things you can't forget, but you can fight to make them better." It's exactly what he needs to hear at this point. He can't fix things with the Jedi Order, the Republic, or Anakin. That's gone forever. So that leaves the question, what can I fix? What can I make better? We always have to work with what we're dealt, and it gets you nowhere to linger on how good your life might have been had tragedy not befallen you. I'll also bring up that when the mute loading droid protects her by covering her body as it's shot in the back, I found that surprisingly tragic. This droid functioned as a slave to the Empire its whole life, then sacrificed itself to save a former Imperial agent. It was a touching moment. Kenobi and Reva speak through the blast doors, revealing her past as a youngling in the Jedi Temple during Order 66. And I appreciate that they don't seem to give her this origin to justify her horrible actions. She's still cruel to innocent people in order to meet her end goal of revenge on Vader. Which leads me to everything Vader in this episode is amazing. My jaw dropped when I saw him pull down the transport ship with the Force. It was like a cool Vader concept art come to life. Then for him to rip it open in his fury, I just loved it so much. Then the Reva versus Vader fight. Seeing him evade her attacks using nothing but the Force was a fantastic demonstration of how he is leaps and bounds ahead of the Inquisitors in terms of skill level. I loved the double blade being ignited and him handing her her own lightsaber. The most memorable duels always have clear movement where you can see the full bodies of both participants. The action was so clear and their movements were so fluid. Again, good stuff. But now I'm gonna get into some of the negatives. So the amount of troopers during the breach. way more cover was needed for these civilians. You know, not just physical cover like boxes and stuff to hide behind, but perhaps atmospheric effects like smoke or fog. Them breaching the door could have been a very good excuse to leave traces of smoke and debris, something that obscures the vision of both the families on the path and the Empire. It also would have been very cinematic, you know, to see the light of the lasers bouncing off the smoke. I think that was a missed opportunity. There was way too clear a line of sight for those families not to be slaughtered by the Empire. And I'm not saying that I would have liked them to be slaughtered, but the outcome of them surviving should have been supported visually. As soon as the stormtroopers started flooding the area, everyone should have cleared out of that hangar. And with such a clear line of sight and so many troopers bunched together, it would have been a great opportunity for Tala to chuck that grenade into the crowd and eliminate a substantial portion of troops. No trap was laid, there was no real excuse shown on screen for the troopers to have failed here. Then Kenobi and Reva's plan. The more I think about it, the less sense Reva listening to Kenobi makes. If she had bided her time this long, she could have waited a little longer. She could have turned Kenobi in and observed Vader from her position of Grand Inquisitor. His most vulnerable position is in his back-to-tank, and I'm sure she can take his security out. But to use Kenobi as bait, wait until after Vader tears down a ship, gets faked out, and then attacks when he's at his absolute angriest.
Not a great plan.
I am taking into consideration that she is rash, vengeful, and employs the use of brute force frequently to get her way, much like Anakin. He was never her master, but I can see a glimmer of an idea in there, where the cycle of violence is being perpetuated. To not feel like a victim, she becomes the victimizer. I do like the idea of that, but it feels less like this moment of attacking him was done in service of her character and more like it was done to get pieces in place for the finale. So next, Bail Organa's message is too expositional. It feels like if he was really concerned with Obi-Wan's life, he would have been much more vague. Again, something done to put the pieces in place for the finale. I think this episode is a huge improvement over episode 4, like I said, but I wish they hadn't have made us wait so long for things we wanted. I know that there must be build-up for there to be payoff, but not all of the build-up in this show has been especially entertaining. In the previous 4 episodes, Kenobi uses his lightsaber in 2 of them, rescues Leia twice, fights 0 Inquisitors, and confronts Vader once in a fragile state. If there was meaty character interaction to sink my teeth into, whether that be in flashbacks or present day, this would not be such a problem. But there isn't, so when your characters are kind of thin and you're not leaning into the strengths of this franchise, that being spectacular battles set to awe-inspiring orchestral music, what are you left with? So, Kenobi has a lot I love to see. I don't hate it at all. I've been enjoying my time with it, but I would just like these stories to overall be more engaging. I think they can do a little better, and that's not going to happen unless we give it fair criticism. Very excited to see how the final confrontation unfolds. I'm not super interested in the Luke stuff because I know really nothing's going to happen with that. Boy, it's been a journey, hasn't it?